The flute is blasting. How y'all doing today, chat? Welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. My name is Alok Kanoja. Just a reminder that although I am a psychiatrist, nothing we discuss on stream today is intended to be for taken as medical advice. Everything is intended to be for educational purposes or entertainment purposes only. So if y'all have a question, concern, please go see a licensed professional. Yeah, so let's go ahead and get started. Well, it looks kind of blue in here. I wonder if I should. Am I allowed to touch this? Oh, it does change. Okay. I was wondering if it's moving on its own, but okay. Stream Elden Ring? Yeah, I'd love to. So, so welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. I started playing Elden Ring. I've also been playing a little bit of Lost Ark. So I've been gaming more than I have in like a really long time. Absolutely loving it. I know that there are a lot of things going wrong in the world right now. And that's kind of unfortunate. We didn't really feel like it was appropriate. We were supposed to stream Elden Ring on Friday, but just with everything that's going on, I think that there's just too much work to be done. So I'd love to stream at some point, but I think especially today too, we've got a couple of posts. So we're going to be covering a post from a Russian in our community. And so I think that, people kind of hopefully need, or not hopefully, but it's unfortunate that people sort of need support. So we'd love to play games. There's also some evidence that shows that playing games can be like emotionally protective, in terms of like if you're dealing with something that can be challenging or traumatic in nature. So, that's totally fine too. It's important to try to have fun and enjoy yourself from time to time, try to distract your mind, but also not in a way that kind of ends up becoming a crutch as opposed to a support, right? So you want to use supports in sort of a healthy way, but then also like grow beyond using them exclusively. So we're going to also be talking about that today. So we're going to be covering a post about, how to find meaning, being Russian and feeling guilt, and also some more bread and butter stuff, which is the inability to channel creative energy into being productive. So sometimes we'll feel a bunch of creative energy, we'll start things, and then they kind of fall apart. So we're going to be talking about those sorts of things today. A couple of quick announcements. So we're going to be going back to a normal streaming schedule this week. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 12 to 2 Central Time. I think I'm trying to prepare a lecture on post-traumatic growth. So this is a really interesting concept from positive psychology that sort of explores how like if a human being has some kind of negative or traumatic event, that can sort of lead to post-traumatic stress or post-traumatic growth. A lot of people will sort of grow and become more secure in themselves and things like that after difficult time, after adversity. And so that's something that we're going to hopefully put together for y'all this week, just to better understand, like, if you're struggling with something in life, like, how can you use that experience to grow as a person as opposed to have it sort of damage you. And the truth is that it's not like a binary thing. So negative experiences can have lingering negative effects and lead to positive growth. So we're going to kind of explore that. I think it's kind of apt for what's going on right now. One other thing is that we do have group coaching spots open. So a lot of people are a little bit confused by what group coaching is. So we are, and thankfully we've got some spots open right now. So group coaching is a little bit different from personal coaching. And I think people who are more interested in sort of like skills building. So the tricky thing about personal coaching is that your coach will be doing most of the, coaching work for you. So they'll be like, helping you, they'll be asking you insightful questions. They'll be sort of, helping you understand yourself, help you develop plans and goals and sort of a plan of action. Whereas in group, it's a little bit different. So this is where y'all will be learning some of those skills yourself. And that we find is actually really, really helpful, right? So if you look at like the medical teaching model, there's this saying that's see one, do one, teach one. So in order to like become competent at something, instead of just being the recipient of it or observing it, you should actually be an active part of the process. So in group coaching, we'll sort of teach people how to introspect in a more direct way. There are a couple of other advantages of group coaching. If you think a little bit about problems that you face, you may have come 25% of the way towards a solution, but going the rest of that 75% of the way can be challenging. Whereas in group, one of the advantages is that there's almost like a party XP kind of effect, where you may have one piece of the puzzle, someone else has another piece of the puzzle, a third person has a piece of the puzzle, and then if you guys kind of put it all together, you will be able to sort of, in a sense, move forward in a way that even with a personal coach, you may not be able to. So we find that group coaching is also like really good in that way. The third thing about group coaching that seems to be pretty positive is that a lot of like the respect that you earn in there can be very, very good for self-confidence and sort of like developing confidence. So it's a place that y'all can be vulnerable and be held accountable by your peers, which I don't know if y'all can sort of understand this, but if you work with a therapist or even a personal coach, or let's say like, one of your friends, it's sort of it's assumed that within that relationship that they respect you, right? That they value you, but earning the respect of your peers can sometimes be like a lot more powerful. The last advantage, which I think is really important to highlight, is actually, so if we think a little bit about the methods we use at HG, we sort of focus on AOE healing, and like you can be caught up in your own problem, but sometimes you can get better insight into your problems when you're listening to someone else talk about them, right? So if we think a little bit about interviews or posts that we share and things like that, it's your resonance with the other person that allows you to learn and grow from it. And sometimes when we get caught up in our own problems, we can't leverage our intellect, our objectivity on the situation. Whereas in group, what happens is when people share a problem, if someone else is going through what you two are going through and you watch them go through it, sometimes you can learn more in an AOE healing way, right? Because then you can see like, oh, this is actually me, but I'm seeing it from the outside, so you can better understand it. So there are differences in terms of personal coaching, group coaching. If that's something that interests y'all, then by all means sign up. I think it takes about 12 to 16 weeks to see very, very solid results. We start to see some improvements in things like direction and life purpose within 4 to 8 weeks. But the data really suggests that 12 weeks is when you really start to see a lot of growth. And so if that's interesting to y'all, by all means, sign up. Okay? Hamza says hello. Well, hello, Hamza. All right. So let's get started. God Spiesel is asking, are you doing any career coaching? No comment. Maybe someone has been. Anyway, we will see. So there's also a question, will there be anything about trauma after sexual offense? So this is the kind of thing where if y'all are dealing with a specific issue, right? So if you've been either a perpetrator or a victim of like an actual traumatic event, that's a good example of like actually going to see a licensed professional to help you work through that. So remember, if y'all were around in our lecture on Friday, one of the main goals I had with that lecture was to explain how trauma is very individualized. Like we use one word, but there's actually a constellation of different things that are going on. And if we look at sort of like the data that shows, okay, how do people cope? What we find is that there are all kinds of aftermath triggers from trauma, and there are all kinds of different coping mechanisms. And that for a given trigger, a certain coping mechanism may be effective. And getting to that level of individual detail is absolutely something that y'all should work with a trained professional. Okay, so shall we jump to posts? Got a couple of good ones. Okay. All right, let's take a look. Nope. No. Okay. So we're going to start with something that's kind of timely. I'm from Russia, and I feel like I am German who let the Holocaust happen. Hi, male 25, first time posting here. Welcome, accomplished elk. I live in Moscow, and I hate what's going on right now. I feel guilty for what's going on right now. I was never a Putin supporter. I'm way more politically left, and political left don't have any dissent representation right now. I haven't ever protested his presidency in my life. I feel like I let it happen. I talked to my mom who watches Russian TV, and there is nothing besides propaganda right now. She said that this war is necessary, and I got the feeling that war wouldn't stop. I really like Russian culture and literature, but I feel shame for being partly responsible for making World War III. I'm afraid of what will happen if Europe and us will retaliate. Also, I don't want to live in poverty for the rest of my days. My biggest fear is being drafted as a soldier. Since I have served in the army. Please don't hate common Russian people. They don't support the war. Hope Dr. K will reply. So this is unfortunately something that's super, super relevant and super challenging. I think sometimes, when major world events happen and we're caught up in them by either association, right? So I'm hearing some amount of guilt by association. I'm Russian. Russia is doing this. Therefore, I'm complicit in these actions. So we all have a sense of identity. And as we identify with a group, we become somewhat responsible for the actions of that group, right? So I identify as American, I identify as an Indian, and therefore if like Indians are doing bad things or Americans are doing bad things, I start to like feel shame. So we have a piece of our identity that gets caught up with things. And as we adopt that identity, we open ourselves up to guilt. So we can hear from this person that this person feels like they could have done more, that there are people who protested and this person never protested. They're also afraid for what's going to happen to them. And these are all really, really like, I was about to say normal. So these are common feelings to have in this situation, but by no means is this situation normal, and it's incredibly challenging. What I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about how guilt through identity forms. So give us some understanding of like, where does this guilt come from? And then I'd also like to talk a little bit about how I personally would, I don't know if recommend is really the right word, but through my struggles, which have been nowhere near as challenging as this person's, I've come to understand a particular perspective on life, which I think is actually like potentially helpful. There's even data to support that. And I'd like to share a little bit about how to make sense of the world and how to act in a situation like this. So the first kind of big disclaimer here is that it's very easy for me to say, oh, you should do this sitting in the comfort and safety of my office here in the United States. I don't think that I'm at risk of being drafted. And so the first thing that I want to acknowledge is that everything that I say may like not apply at all, right? The severity of the situation here is very, very challenging. And so if what I say kind of doesn't feel like it lands, like that's okay. Ultimately, you have to decide. But this person is asking for help, and so I'm going to do my best to help. And what I'd also like to talk about today is a little bit of almost like the theory of karma. And we'll talk a little bit about why that's important. Not that you have to believe in the theory of karma, but when human beings are faced with challenging scenarios, one of the key things that we have to do to navigate this, and this is supported by data, is that you have to figure out a way to navigate this challenging experience. And that doesn't necessarily mean like physically navigate. It means like internally, identity-wise, like how do I make sense of how I should act? And some of those general principles I do feel confident in sharing because they are like, somewhat personal, somewhat based in science. But we're going to be talking a little bit almost about spiritual perspectives today. So if you're sort of someone who is stuck in a situation where you feel guilty for the actions of your country people, your countrymen, countrywomen, for the actions of politicians, for the actions of people that aren't exactly you, if you feel guilty for not doing enough to step up and stop them, how do you start to navigate that? So let's talk a little bit about that. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is how to deal with identity guilt. Okay, so if we kind of remember this person's post, what they're sort of saying is, I'm Russian. I feel responsible. I feel guilty because, our country is attacking another country. So how do you deal with that? So the first thing that we have to do is acknowledge that, to my knowledge, that there's kind of two things going on here. The first is that this appears to be guilt by association. So sometimes our mind, and it's sort of designed to do this, gets some sense of identity through the people that we associate with, right? So our identity with a group can create guilt. So even though this person hasn't been drafted yet, is not fighting, is not shooting at Ukrainians or anything like that, like they're not actually being a direct participant, So in the absence of direct participation, let's just acknowledge for a moment that it's kind of strange that this person still feels guilty, right? It's not like they work for Putin. They're not, supporting Putin. They're not currently enlisted. They're not, carrying out orders. They're not committing war crimes or anything like that. So even in the absence of action, we can sometimes feel guilt. So this is actually like normal, okay? So let's try to understand how that works. And this has to do with identity. So when we identify with something, we open ourselves up to some kind of connection to it. And once we connect to it in a certain way, we open ourselves up to all kinds of emotions through that identification. So let's use an example. So if we look at sports teams or esports teams, right? If you have a favorite team or esports team and you're not playing, right? Like, what's your contribution? Like, maybe you're posting in Twitch chat, maybe you're tweeting or something like that, but your contribution is quite small. And at the same time, if your team wins and beats your friend's team, for example, you feel pride, right? You can even feel arrogant. You start trash talking. And then if your team loses, you feel the opposite. You feel shame. You feel disappointment. Right? I don't know how much longer I can support this team. It's so hard. I love them so much. But it causes me so much pain to be able to do this, to support them, to put all my heart and soul into wanting them wanting them to win. And I've seen this a lot. So I was in Boston for several years, and Boston sports fans tend to sometimes be nasty people. A lot of them are really good. The majority of them are super nice. But some of them are just super arrogant, because in physical sports like football and stuff like that, Boston has been very dominant in terms of football, baseball, even the Celtics, the basketball. And so sometimes you'll talk to people who think that they're God's gift to earth because they support a sports team. Because the first thing to understand is that through identification with something, we open ourselves up to emotions, both good and bad, with that thing. So this is where so one solution already is to de-identify with the thing, the group. Okay? Now this is where I wouldn't necessarily recommend this, but if you really look at hardcore yoga, the goal of spiritual pursuits is to de-identify from all this sort of stuff. I'm not going to actually advocate for that today, but understand that it is a path that leads to peace of mind, okay? So if I sort of take a step back and sort of say that, I am an Indian, but I'm not, there's sort of a logical element as well that you can kind of differentiate between what you do and what your group does. So I can disidentify, I understand that I'm not responsible for the behavior of other Indians, right? I'm only really responsible for my behavior. And then there may be some actions that I can take that hopefully I can try to influence other people's behavior. But essentially, I'm not responsible for the actions of other Indians or other Americans. The only person I'm really responsible for is myself. So one thing is that you can go down the route of de-identification. So, we've talked a lot about developing identity and how that process goes. We've taught meditation about it. Shunya practices are really good here, right? So to sort of let go of your identity. But this is where there's more to this. So we can try to de-identify with the group, but the other thing we have to remember is that the world makes it hard to de-identify with a group, right? So let's just acknowledge this. So sure, you can say okay, just meditate your identity away. But let's remember that there's a lot of data that shows that the world doesn't let us do this, right? So I remember after September 11th, I was a university student, and people made racist comments towards me. They didn't understand that I was not from the same country that, flew planes into the Twin Towers. I had no real affiliation with them. But the amount of hate crimes, racism, etc., that even I faced just because of the color of my skin was surprisingly high, right? And sometimes the people that would say nasty things to me weren't interested in understanding that I don't advocate for that behavior even to, the country people or ethnic groups that were responsible for the 9/11 attacks. But like, even that I think is unfair, but they don't even understand, like, I'm a different country. Like, India historically has been, invaded by Muslims for like thousands of years, or not thousands, like about 1,000 years, right? So, but people don't want to hear that. Okay. And by sort of acknowledging that, I'm not saying that all Muslims are bad by any means. Okay. It's just like, it's just kind of bizarre. I was talking to people down in Texas and they didn't understand that, it's bizarre. Like, my racial identity is not even what you think it is. And it's like quite the opposite. And we also see this actually with COVID. So this is really unfortunate, but I think hate crimes against Asian people in the United States have gone way up, right? So the truth is that the world doesn't like let you de-identify. The world judges you. And so when the world judges you, it becomes hard to separate your identity. It becomes hard to sort of say like, hey, that's not me, that's not fair. Because the psychological impact, the emotional impact of that judgment is still gonna matter, right? Like, you can feel it, like you just can't stop it. Like, your brain isn't wired to be like, oh, that racism is logically incorrect, therefore it's not going to affect me. When another human being is kind of in your face and saying nasty things to you, that has like a brainstem, like reptilian brain sort of like sense of threat that gets created in your mind, which absolutely emotionally affects you. And the unfortunate thing is that even Russians, like, we're seeing this too, are being like, treated poorly, like on the internet, where, I've heard some bad things happening in Dota. So Dota has a large Russian player base, and there's like a lot of racism directed towards them, right? Thankfully, I see a lot of people, calling to stop that sort of behavior and remember that people aren't, responsible for this, and it's not fair to like give in to your racist attitudes. But this is the kind of thing where it's like, Russians are probably being treated poorly like all over the world right now. Even the ones who are expats, they're being blamed for this kind of thing because that's what ignorant people do. They just find people to blame and they don't really care about what the facts are. So this is really, really challenging. And so it's like really hard to just de-identify with your Russian identity because of like, people are like, it's just hard because you grew up Russian, you identify that way, people are treating you that way. So it's really challenging. So then the question is like, what do you do in this situation? Right? And this is where I know it's kind of tricky, but like, I don't have all the answers, but I have some kind of insight. And this is where if you're struggling in this kind of situation, let's say you're a Russian in you may be drafted and you don't want to go fight. You don't want to be a part of this process. How do you manage circumstances that you don't control? And so now I'm going to take a far step away from science and sort of lean on some of the spiritual traditions that I've studied. And the reason that I'm going to do that is sort of related to science for a second. So if we look at research on post-traumatic growth, what we see is that people who sort of take their circumstances and filter them or digest them or process them through an internal framework do better. So this leads to growth. So what does this mean? So we know that when someone experiences trauma, helping that person come to some sort of understanding about how it affects their identity and how it shapes how they navigate the world ultimately is what determines like whether you end up moving towards post-traumatic growth. So if you're going through an adverse experience, like, you want nothing more than for that experience to go away, right? But the interesting thing is that like, it's adverse experiences that actually make us the people that we are. So my identity is not formed, I mean, to a certain degree, I suppose it is, if I'm just like playing video games all day. But in a sense of like a positive identity that I can be proud of, be confident in who I am, and even make the world a better place and support other people, it comes through my adverse experiences. So now I'll just share a little bit about, like my own situation. I'm not saying that this comes anywhere close because it's not like I was drafted for war or anything like that. But So when I was in like failing out of college and stuff, like I wanted nothing more than for like to be able to stop playing video games. I just like wanted to wipe my life away and just like start over. I wanted to transplant to a different mind, a different body, a different work ethic, a different discipline. I wanted nothing more than for this situation to go away. And yet it's through that situation, through the adversity of that situation, that I learned to grow. I learned who I truly am. I learned also like how to help other people, right? So I know it sounds kind of weird, but okay. This sounds weird. Hold on. Give me 1 second. Okay. Okay. So if we think a little bit about how to navigate the world, how to help people, that comes from my negative experience. Okay? So it's sort of like, you know, through my adversity, I grew into the person that I am. And I know it sounds kind of weird, but like now looking back on it, I don't really think a little bit about, you know, I don't regret going through that. Was it painful? Did I wish it was easier? Absolutely. But it's through the adversity of my own addiction that I learned a lot about myself. I developed who I am, and I sort of determined a little bit about like how I'm going to help the rest of the world. So I know it sounds kind of weird, but like it's actually adversity that shapes who we are. And also makes, you know, gives us an opportunity to help the world. And so this becomes kind of hard to understand, especially with relation to like the Russian stuff, right? Because like it's easy for me to kind of say I was in this situation where like I was addicted to video games and I kind of like, you know, had some circumstances that changed. I explored myself. I went to India, all these sorts of things. And then like I grew as a person. Now like the situation in Russia is like far more dire, right? We're talking about potentially being drafted to war. We're talking about like potentially being, you know, I hear that there's like a run on the banks. I hear that there's like, you know, there may be poverty. There may be like huge economic problems from all the sanctions. So it's like kind of easy for me to say in my comfortable situation, like, oh, like adversity is going to help you grow as a person. Good job. It's not that simple. And at the same time, I think that it's worthwhile if you're in this situation. It's not only worthwhile, it's necessary to explore what you think about how the world works, why you're in the situation, and how to move forward. And it's through asking those kinds of questions that I think ultimately is going to be your road forward. And I feel really confident in saying that because it's not just my situation in which that formula worked, right? We can even look at people like Holocaust survivors, like Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. And he essentially like went through that introspective process and came out the other side stronger and had a profound impact on the world. He wrote a book about it, which now has helped trauma survivors for like, you know, many, many years, like decades. Like tons of people have read that book and benefited from it. So it's kind of weird, but even our contributions to to the world, even our dharma is oftentimes born of adversity. And so a lot of times people will ask me, how do I find my dharma or my duty in life? And that's where I kind of say, like, sometimes your dharma finds you, okay? So how can we make sense of, like, you know, you're in Russia right now, like, how can you kind of make sense of it? Here's the model that I use. Now we're going to depart from science. We're going to talk a little bit about spirituality. And particularly, I'm going to lean on the karmic religions. But, you know, you can use whatever you want to. You can use philosophy, stoicism, whatever. And so here's the way that I kind of look at it. So let's say that you're in Russia right now and you don't want to be Russian. Like, how can we understand this? So here's kind of the process I went through. I'm not saying that this is logically 100% or bulletproof. It's just what worked for me. And so this is the important thing about post-traumatic growth, is that you don't need it to be logically bulletproof, right? All you need is some way to organize your thoughts. And as long as like you have an internal compass that makes sense to you, that's what's important. It's not about the objectivity of the thing. So when I was kind of thinking a little bit about my life, the first question that I had is like, is my life dependent on RNG, or is there some kind of like karmic impact? So in this concept of karma in the Eastern religions, they sort of presume that there's like kind of like a reason, or there's some sort of cause and effect at play in terms of the circumstances of your birth, right? So and that sounds kind of weird. It's like, is it God? Is it like, well, no, not really. It's not really there's any kind of divine intervention. It's just they believe in this thing called karma. And what is karma? So let's talk about this for a second. So karma is simply the principle of cause and effect. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. Now, the interesting thing, the reason that karma gets very, very mystically oriented is because we apply cause and effect all the time to things like, oh my God, that's terrible. So generally speaking, we know that there's science. There are things like physics, right? And so physics has cause and effect. These are like Newtonian mechanics, for example, right? So we know this to be true, that cause and effect applies to physics. And then once we use physics, we go to chemistry, right? And then we know that like chemical reactions are also kind of have a cause and effect to them, right? So if I mix like an acid and a base, I'm going to get an exothermic reaction, and that in turn is rooted in physics. So we can see that, this is the very baseline of science. Then we move up to chemistry. Then we move to biochemistry. So this is how cells function. Then we move to biology. Then we move to neurobiology. Then we move to neuroscience. Then we move to psychology. Then we move to group psychology. We can even move to economics. Right? So this includes things like advertising. So it's kind of interesting because if you look at this, what you can sort of see is that, like cause and effect is very clear here. But as we move down the chain of like sciences, from the hard sciences to the soft sciences, what we end up doing is we can even sort of determine some amount of cause and effect at such a global scale as like economics. And so the main question that I sort of had, like personally when I was exploring this, is does cause and effect stop at some point? If we take like all the stuff that happens in the world, right? Let's say like this is all the things that happen in the world. Does cause and effect like go this far and then stop? And then over here, like cause and effect stops working. And the conclusion I came to is that if we look at science, this used to be cause and effect, and this used to be divine, right? Oh, like why does this happen? Like why does lightning happen? Oh, it's Zeus. Zeus causes it to happen. So there's essentially like some amount of order in the universe, and the rest of it is like beyond our control or understanding. And then as science advances, we move this way. And then suddenly like, this is where the principle of cause and effect is. And this is where, kind of God resides or religion resides. And then over time, what's happening is like we're moving over here. Right? So now as we've learned more about science, now cause and effect is this big. And then even like we learned some really interesting scientific advances that kind of even support, I know it sounds kind of weird, but the theory of karma. One is genetics. Because like for thousands of years, people in the East have been saying the reason you're born has a mechanism to it. It has an order or a reasoning to it. It's not RNG. And then what we sort of discovered is genetics, which is kind of interesting because now we sort of know that there are very scientific reasons that can determine how tall you are, right? And these are things that are determined prior to your birth. So some aspects of your life in this life are actually determined before you're even born, which is one of the central concepts of karma, which sounds like really bizarre. And then when you talk about genetics, people are like, no, but that's genetics. That's not karma. But let's remember, like, what came first? Like, that theory that some things about your life are determined prior to birth, or the theory of genetics. And so let's talk about RNG, because the other part of it is, so random number generator is what it is, but we kind of use it as randomness. And so then you kind of have to decide, like, are you born on this earth for no reason whatsoever, or is there some amount of cause and effect at play? And I personally find it useful to assume that it's not RNG, because it helps me make sense of things. Now, let's be clear here for a second. We're not saying objectively that it's true that this isn't random. What we're saying, and this is what we kind of lean on, is that from a functional perspective, if we go to, the studies of post-traumatic growth and things like that, people who can find some sense of order in the universe are able to handle adversity better. So it's not that, I'm not saying that karma is like technically correct. I'm not saying that it's objectively correct and that there's some grand rhyme or reason. That's the other thing that I think people misassume, is that there's some grand design, which I don't know that that's really how it works based on my understanding of karma. I think that's a human why that we sort of attach to it. But we absolutely do know that making sense of things in your mind, so for example, people will use religion as a coping mechanism, right? So they'll like, the way that they make sense of the world is that God wills it. And it's not our place to decide whether God is real or not real. That's something you have to decide for yourself. But what we can say scientifically is that having some sense of order in the universe does appear to give people like a way to cope with things. Does that make sense? So I personally choose to believe, because it helps me make sense of the world, that like I was not born randomly. Like when I think about my own birth, right? So like Dr. K's character sheet, what was the RNG that I was given? So one is like I'm Indian, right? So I get a +10 to studying Eastern scriptures, right? If we think about my circumstances, like it's easier for me to study Eastern scriptures than it is for like someone who's not Indian. It's just, why is that? It's because when I read like a Sanskrit text, like I grew up with the language, a dialect of that, so I can understand these words like more easier. It's just a racial bonus. It's not that anyone else can't understand it as well as I can. It's just they have to work a little bit harder, right? The other thing is that like, I have parents who are doctors. So that's like, I don't know if that there's a talent for medicine that's genetic, but it certainly gives me certain amounts of advantages. They emphasize, like culturally, for example, I was taught to value becoming a physician, right? Like I was like, it's an honored profession. Like my dad also like taught me a lot about being a physician. My mom taught me a lot about being a physician. Like they sort of were really, really like caring in the way that they provided their care. So I grew up with certain like circumstantial experiences, which I think have made me a better physician. Once again, it's not like you need those sorts of things to be a good physician. That's the cool thing about medical school and residency, is like you kind of have opportunities to learn all that stuff. You have lots of mentors and things like that. But when I kind of look at this, like it's sort of like, I kind of have advantages towards spirituality and medicine. Well, the third thing is like I bought points with a video game addiction. Right? So I bought some character points. So like in order to get these advantages, I have to spend 10 character points here and 10 character points here, but I only have 10 character points to spend. So what I ended up doing is purchasing video game addiction with 10 more character points. Right? And so this is where like, this is kind of my character sheet. And so when I look at these circumstances, I can see how these have sort of led to the kind of situation that I'm in. Like they've sort of given me some advantages here. And so if you're stuck in Ukraine or Russia right now and you're afraid of being drafted, you may be afraid of being Russian. You may be tired of being Russian. You may not want to be Russian. And at the same time, like I want to encourage you to think a little bit more critically about what situation you're in. So is it bad to be drafted? Absolutely, right? We don't want to get drafted. Is there economic uncertainty in your future? Absolutely. Is that scary? Do I wish that you were in that situation? Absolutely not. And at the same time, like, I think it's really important to remember that you don't know what the future holds, and that your identity as a Russian could be like a really positive thing. So let me like explain to you how. So even through this post, right, which like has gotten 400 upvotes, which is like a ton of upvotes on our subreddit, you know, like you have shared with the internet that like Russians are not in favor of some of this stuff. I think that like through this post, you have helped reduce the hate against the Russian people on the internet, right? So you've already created, in my opinion, a positive impact just by sharing your struggle. And who knows what's going to happen. If you get drafted into the army, like, is that a bad thing? Sure. I've worked with a fair number of veterans, and it's surprising like how boring being in the army is, like even in Iraq and Afghanistan, right? So these are like active combat zones. I'm not saying that you're not going to see combat. I have no idea what's going to happen. But a lot of army, like being in the army is honestly like waiting around. That's what I've heard. I've never been in the army myself, but I've worked with dozens of patients, and they're like, it's mostly waiting around. So you never know what's going to happen. The other thing is that, you know, like it may be very impactful for you to be part of the army, right? This is the kind of thing where like you never know like whose life you could save by being in the army. Maybe there's a friend of yours. Maybe there's like a colleague. Maybe there's a medic. And because you're there, you're able to do something like good. And that's, you know, that, and then maybe by saving a medic's life, you in turn like are affecting, you know, by saving that person's life, that person saves 5 more people. And then there are 5 people who get to go home to their parents and family instead of like going home in body bags. So I know it sounds kind of weird, but like even being a part of the army, will you be asked to do like bad things? Very possibly. You may be asked to do things, you may not have a choice. But that's where like, you know, personally, like I don't blame you for being caught in your circumstances. Those are your circumstances. And I've heard of, at least through people, you know, that soldiers can do like a lot of really good things, right? There may be civilians that one of your colleagues is not going to be careful with, and you may actually stop them and say like, hey, we shouldn't like shoot that RPG because we don't know who's in that building, right? Maybe we should withdraw. Or maybe there are going to be civilians that get caught in the wrong area that you can like actually go and save. Like you have no idea what you're capable of. You have no idea what's going to happen, even if you get drafted into the army. Is it scary? Absolutely. Do I wish that your circumstances were different? Absolutely. And don't underestimate what you as a human being are capable of in terms of affecting change, no matter what your circumstances are. Who knows what you're going to be like? Hopefully you get to come back if you go in the first place. What you stand up for after this experience. Because what I'm hearing from people like you is that there's a large number of people in Russia who are not happy with this. And it's that dissatisfaction which is going to be the antidote to apathy. Because how does the world get into the situation that it's in? Right? How do we get here? We get here through apathy. We get here through people not caring enough. We get here through people like not doing anything about it, right? And when the world drafts you to play a particular role, if you're Russian, this is where I'd say like, instead of being ashamed, which I understand you are ashamed, which is okay, but over time, I'd hope that the way that you view being Russian and the way that you act can be a point of pride for other Russians. That there are going to be some Russians who are doing things that people are unhappy with, that people want to blame, that incite racism, but that you as a Russian can act in a manner that runs contrary to that, right? Because if you're part of the identity, you get to say what happens too. You get to act in a particular way, and those actions can be profoundly positive. And we've seen this like time and time again throughout history, that people who, you know, even I'm thinking a little bit about the civil rights movement in the United States, where there was a lot of shame and racism towards being black, right? And yet true heroes were born out of the civil rights movement. That you can't have, you know, heroes in that movement without those circumstances. And this is just how the world works. So if you're someone who's stuck in Russia, if you're someone who feels complicit, if you're someone who feels guilty, I totally understand those feelings. Like, I think there's a lot of good scientific reasons why you feel that way. And remember that you don't have to be labeled just by that Russian identity. You get to inform that label as well. Is it terrifying? Absolutely. Do I wish your circumstances were different? Absolutely. And at the same time, like, be the kind of Russian that you want to be. Right? When people think about Russians, like, what do you want them to envision? And you have an opportunity to change their minds. You've already done it with a simple post on the internet, right? Because who knows how many thousands of people, maybe couple hundred people, couple thousand people saw it on a subreddit. We're talking about it on stream. Now, thousands more people are going to be reached by it. It may get uploaded to YouTube, in which case tens of thousands of people will see it. And so sometimes we grossly underestimate the power that we have to affect people in the world. And this is the big thing that I've sort of maintained from the get-go is like, I'm nothing special. Each and every one of you has the capacity to do exactly what I've done. And that's absolutely what needs to happen because I can't fix the world. Like, I'm just a human being. I have one mouth, 2 ears, 1 nose, 2 eyes, 1 heart, 2 hands, 2 feet. That's all I am. And in order to deal with the problems that the world has, we need all of you. We need all of you to do whatever you can. So if you're Russian and you get drafted, you try to be the best soldier that you can be. Does that necessarily mean following orders? Like, I don't know. That's not for me to determine. But hopefully you can save a life. Hopefully you can, help people, your comrades or other people, civilians, whatever. Because then you'll be in a position of immense power. In terms of economic uncertainty, I don't know what to expect. I don't know what your life is going to be like. But that's also where, like, maybe Russia needs you to go through this so that you can make things better for people who are born today. Because in 25 years, there's going to be a 25-year-old Russian kid who's born today, 25 years from now. And what does it mean for that person to be Russian? When he's 25 years old, is he going to feel pride or guilt? That, in turn, is going to be determined by the actions of the Russians today. So the world, we sort of think of ourselves as like passive participants in the world. This is something that I do not agree with. No snowflake believes it's responsible for the avalanche. Right? What is an avalanche? So much power, so much destructive power, so much power to shape the literal ground. And yet all it is like snowflakes, individual snowflakes. And so if you're someone who's like, feels like, oh, I can't do anything, like I don't, I'm not saying I wish you were in this situation. I don't. But I personally choose to organize my life around the belief that like these things happen for a reason. And that even adversity serves as like an opportunity to do something and grow and try to impact the world in a better place. Because like that's the only way this is going to work, right? It's like each and every one of you has to realize that you can be a profound force for positive change. And until you realize that, like the world is going to keep moving in the direction that it's going. Right? You can look at people like Martin Luther King or Nelson Mandela or, Greta Thunberg, like whoever. People are advocating for change and they're all individuals. And you are too. So is it hard? Yes. Do I wish your life was different? Absolutely. And at the same time, don't underestimate what you're capable of. Because it's immense. And it's human beings who have understood or even not understood, but acted anyway, who've devoted themselves to action and making the world a better place. That is the reason why things are as good as they are. Right? There's a scientist who invented penicillin or discovered penicillin. There are people who discovered the polio vaccine, COVID vaccines. There's a lot of good stuff out there, right? People developed solar panels. People did research on ocean trawling. And now we're starting to take like some of the issues around climate like pretty seriously. And so like everyone can be a force for positive change. It's just challenging. I'm not saying it's easy. This is the other thing is like we tend to, encourage those heroes. Like we kind of say like, oh, like look at that hero. It sucks to be a hero. Right? That they don't tell you that part. Like that's not what we romanticize. The truth is that being a hero or a heroine oftentimes sucks. It's not like a pleasant experience. But the world may call on you. And it sounds like for this person, like the world is calling on you. And I think it's your job to answer. Because if you don't, who else will? Like if you end up getting drafted and you don't stop your colleagues from shooting a civilian, then like you don't know if they're going to do that, right? So you have to step up when life asks you to. And that, I personally use the theory of karma, but you don't necessarily have to. Find whatever it is, like whether it's Stoic philosophy or Christianity or Islam or whatever you want to use to navigate your life. But try to find some system to navigate your life and recognize that at the end of the day, like what it means to be Russian is not something that affects you, or it is something that affects you, but it's more than that. What it means to be Russian is something that is determined by you. I see people are asking about nihilism. I want to move on to the second post. Yeah, I'm scared too, right? Okay. Let's move on to the second one. This is a good one. How to move past the existential feeling that nothing really matters. I want to live a life that I want to live, but I just don't see the purpose or point to anything. Yeah, I can help others, and yeah, it feels good when I do. I can try, and maybe I actually help, or maybe I don't. Maybe I fail, maybe I succeed. At the end of the day, what does it all really matter anyway? What does it matter whether I live a happy life or a sad life? What does it matter whether I write an inspirational best-selling book or I just play video games all day? We're all just specks of dust on a rock whirling in space, which is itself a speck of dust in an unfathomably vast and complex universe. We get to live for this brief window of time. What's the point of anything other than just maybe maximizing pleasure and minimizing gain? Before our time comes and it's over, just like it is for every other mortal creature, from the most revered among us to the lowly cockroach. How do people achieve a feeling that their life matters and feel a sense of fulfillment from what to do? Great question. So oftentimes, we're in a position where we don't really understand like what matters, right? We have no experience of it. So we ask these questions like, how do I achieve a life that matters? How do I find a sense of fulfillment? But we don't actually know what fulfillment is, right? Because what is this person chasing? And in the absence of actually understanding fulfillment, what happens is their intellect comes up with all these different things, right? It comes up with like, oh, like I'm completely insignificant on a cosmic level, which may be true. And so what does it matter whether I do something or I don't do something? Because in the grand scheme of things, what does it matter? Well, that's a very good question. And so this is where I think we have to start by sort of unpacking, like, what does fulfillment even mean? Because what I tend to find in these sorts of situations is that when I don't, existential, let's call it nihilism. When we're faced with existential nihilism, here's kind of how the sequence of things runs, okay? So we look at the world, and we don't see meaning. No meaning, no fulfillment. Right? We're kind of looking around, we're like, I don't see the meaning here. And so then what happens is since it's not like apparent to us, we start to become nihilistic. And then in the absence of meaning, we've got a void that we tend to fill up with pleasure seeking and pain avoidance. So in the absence of like fulfillment, which is that dopaminergic, like we're not really sure. Right? Because when people talk about fulfillment, they're not talking about things that are dopaminergic usually. What they're usually talking about is like something else that we don't really know what it is. And so what we end up doing is like we don't see a clear road to it, intellectually that is. And so what we do see and what we have experienced is like dopaminergic stuff. So that's what we kind of do, right? We kind of fill it up that way. So what's kind of going on? And this sort of results in essentially hedonism, right? And so what this person is kind of saying is like, in my mind, I cannot logically discover fulfillment. Therefore, I'm going to default to hedonism. Okay? So let's like start by sort of understanding if you want to find fulfillment, how do we go about doing that? Like from a critical standpoint, right? So let's start by understanding what is fulfillment. Right? So if you want to find something, like if you want to like do something in life, you have to start by like understanding how to go about first of all, what it is. And if you know what it is, then you can start to develop a plan to like find it, right? But the first thing to understand is like, what is fulfillment? Like if I were to ask this person, or I would ask you if you're nihilistic, and I ask you, what is fulfillment? I think what we're going to get is a shrug of the shoulders. And it's in the absence of understanding what fulfillment is that we do this kind of thing. Okay? So this is essentially, in a weird way, it's almost like Dunning-Kruger. So when we lack understanding, we fill it in with theory. Right? So I just want y'all to think about it. And our society is moving in this direction. So our society is like moving towards the direction of like proxies instead of like true understanding. So this is why we use grades instead of knowledge when deciding like who to hire out of college, right? It's why we use stock prices instead of fundamentals when evaluating the economy or companies. And there are some people who do evaluate fundamentals, right? So Berkshire Hathaway, for example, Warren Buffett, like evaluates fundamentals. And that's part of the reason that probably is so successful. I'm not an expert in the stock market or anything, so take that with a grain of salt. But the key thing here is that our mind, when we don't really understand something, will just like fill it in with what logically we're able to produce. So this is kind of like, I remember when I was 13 years old, my friends would talk about what the best like position is to have sex in. And it's like a bunch of virgins just like talking about this stuff, and they would like argue with each other, right? They have no idea, but they don't really stop and think a little bit about like, they don't think about that, right? It's kind of interesting because it's not like the ignorance of something prevents people from having an opinion. In fact, quite the opposite. And this is where Dunning-Kruger comes in. So if I'm playing, Dota with like people who are 8K MMR and 2K MMR, and no one knows their MMR, the 2K player will be flaming the 8K player for not coming to fights that are stupid and irrelevant, right? So they're like, we don't recognize when we're ignorant of something. We just fill it in with like our random logic. So then the kind of question becomes, okay, what are the tools at our disposal to understanding fulfillment? So if we want to start this, how do we start? So let's start by understanding that we have two fundamental tools for understanding things. We have experience and we have intellect. Okay? And generally speaking, our society tends to emphasize intellect. It tends to emphasize logic. And it's value to this. There's no question about there being value. But when it comes to something like fulfillment, if I were to logically lay out an argument, this is what fulfillment is. It's not going to catalyze behavior. It's not going to catalyze understanding. So this is the other kind of interesting thing, is that logic does not usually create behavioral change. Experience creates behavioral change. And so what I'm hearing from this person is like, if their struggle is, why don't I just play video games all day versus try to write a best-selling novel, that's a behavioral difference. So the real problem with nihilism, in my opinion, is that like it doesn't dictate the right kind of behavior, right? What is the right kind of behavior? We'll get to that in a second. So let's start by understanding like, what is fulfillment? So like, let me ask y'all a question. What do you think it's like to climb Mount Everest? What do y'all think is the experience of climbing Mount, or not the experience, what do you think it's like? Do you think it's fulfilling? Right? So I want y'all to notice this for a second. Oh, no. We got this or no? Okay. Oh, there we go. Hopefully it'll populate. So I want y'all to kind of notice this, that no one is saying, I don't know. Right? Everyone is coming up with answers. It's scary. It's challenging. It's cold. So like, notice what your mind does. Even in the absence of any kind of experience, no one's like, I don't know. Everyone's like, must be this way, must be this way, must be. So your mind is already, like, people are calling it exhilarating. Like, your mind is already like coming up with answers for things that you have no idea about, right? It's really fascinating. So what is fulfillment? So like, let's think a little bit. So if we talk about Everest for a moment, I imagine that climbing Mount Everest is fulfilling. So it's kind of weird. So when I say I imagine that, what I'm going to actually talk about is climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, which I have done. So when I climb, and y'all are pretty right, okay? And so like, it's all of those things, right? So it's cold because your intellect is not poor. It's a good intellect. Y'all are right. It's hard. Some people are saying it's exhilarating. Right? So I would say that climbing Mount Kilimanjaro was absolutely a fulfilling experience for me. It gave some sense to meaning of my life. And what I learned from it was kind of bizarre. So I got to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro, and like, my first thought upon being on top of the world, and the view is amazing because you're 20,000 feet up in the air and you can see like the African savanna like all around you. And so it's bizarre. It's like, it's so weird to be, you know, the view you get from an airplane. It's like that view, but you can look 360. It's not secluded to a window. And so it's amazing because you're 20,000 feet up in the air. And when you see that, my first thought was like, all right, let's go. How quickly can we get down? This is amazing and all, but holy crap, the first thing I want to do is get back down to the ground. And so it was like such a bizarre experience, and it sort of helped me understand and appreciate, like, yeah, this was really amazing, but I never want to do this again. Right? And so it's kind of bizarre, but was that experience fulfilling? I'd say absolutely. Was it all of these things as well? Absolutely. And this is what I want y'all to understand, is that the intellect can hypothesize these things, but this is the tricky thing about the intellect, is once you hypothesize an answer, the intellect will say, you don't need to bother because I have figured out what that experience is going to be like. This is what's so dangerous about the intellect. I don't need to bother. I already know that. And so the tricky thing about the intellect is that the intellect actually can keep your behaviors the same. So it's going to say things like, keep playing video games. Right? Like, think about this for a second. What do you think is the result? What is this an argument for? Let's assume for a minute that there's a covert argument in this. And this is the justification that we use for playing video games all day, right? So I think that this person is like actually asking a really good question. They're curious. They're genuinely wanting to grow. But there's like a subtle, sneaky thing here going on, which is, this is basically saying, don't bother doing anything. Let me just get my dopaminergic hit. Okay? So let's try to understand a little bit about what fulfillment truly is. Now we're going to step to science for a second. Okay? So first thing you've got to do is figure out what is fulfillment. If you want to understand how to build a fulfilling life, you have to start by figuring out what is fulfillment. So now we're going to talk a little bit about video game addiction and the nature of fulfillment. So the reason that video games are addictive is not because they provide a reward. The reason video games are addictive, this is an oversimplification, but there's good data behind this, is actually because of the denial of the reward. So this is really, really important, right? So like, everyone's playing Elden Ring now. I'm still stuck on the first boss, which is alarmingly hard. I thought I was get good, but I just haven't been able to get good. Right? So what makes it so fulfilling? Like, how does it feel to beat that boss? I don't know, right? Because I haven't done it yet. So it's the denial of the reward followed by the reward that actually creates the sense of fulfillment in a video game. This is really, really important to understand. And this is why games are so friggin' addictive. Because they're going to deny you the reward for a time, but you know that eventually you're going to get it. It's the only place where the denial of reward has the guarantee of the reward after some amount of time. That's why they're so addictive. Because what happens in WoW, right? When there's like endgame content, like what happens 3-6 months after the content gets released and all the hardcore raid guilds do it? They nerf the content. So you've wiped on this boss 15 times, but don't worry, the game devs have your back. You're gonna beat that boss eventually. Right? Whereas like Dark Souls doesn't do that. So some people quit because there's no guarantee of the reward in Dark Souls. And so game developers will even use this mechanic. I don't think they really use it nefariously personally. I think they're just like, okay, like we'll let the hardcore people do it and we want to have everyone have this experience. I don't think that they're evil or diabolical about it. But there's good data that shows that denial of reward is what makes games addictive. And if we think about adverse experiences or fulfilling experiences, right? We just talked about climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. Like a huge part of the fulfillment of climbing Mount Kilimanjaro was how hard it is. So this is where adversity into success is a huge component of fulfillment. Right? So we talked a little bit about Russia, like overcoming video game addiction, writing a best-selling novel is not about ego. I mean, if it's about ego, that's totally fine. But generally speaking, I think when you write a really good novel or you create a good piece of work, or like even as a doctor, when I see a patient and I do right by that patient, that feels fulfilling. Like I feel really amazed with myself and I feel really good about myself after I work a call shift that's 30 hours because it's hard and I did a good job and I'm proud of what I accomplished. But it's actually like the difficulty that leads to some of the advantage. So I remember many months ago, I went hiking and I found like a bush of wild berries. And like the berries were not nearly as good as what you get in the supermarket, but damn, were they so like satisfying. I enjoyed them so much more than the objectively sweeter and tastier berry that you find from the supermarket. So if we look at sort of the science of fulfillment, what we tend to find is that adversity into success is a huge part of it, right? What are people proud of? They're proud of things that they had to overcome. We see video games take advantage of this. And this is also where if we look at substance use, we can see an element of this principle here as well. So what makes a substance so satisfying? It's actually the craving. It's the denial of the thing. So when I crave something, right? So I've worked with people who are like addicted to heroin. And the worse their cravings get, like they it becomes so difficult. And then when you finally use, it feels so relieving. And people who use like over and over and over again, like they actually don't enjoy it as much as like if they've had cravings and then they use. So when I talk to people who relapse, what they consistently tell me is it's like the first 1 or 2 uses when they relapse that are the best. And after that, they don't even enjoy it after that. It feels awful. It's kind of like playing a video game where like at the very beginning, a video game is actually really, really fun. And it's when you sort of like get into it over and over and over and over and over again that your dopamine circuitry kind of adapts and then it's no longer fun. Right? So this is why, like, just to be clear, I'm not advocating for usage of any of this kind of stuff. I'm just using it to illustrate this point. That adversity into success, that denial of the reward followed by the reward, can be incredibly satisfying. Now, is that the nature of fulfillment? I'm not sure. Okay. So then the question becomes like, okay, how do I find fulfillment? So this is the question you should ask. And be careful because you can ask this question intellectually. You can answer it intellectually. You can read 1,000 books about finding fulfillment. And will you have found fulfillment? Absolutely not. Right? Like you can watch as much pornography as you want to, but no amount of watching pornography is ever a substitute for getting laid. And so this is what's happening in the world as we move towards higher and higher intellectualization in the absence of experience. We start to form like opinions about stuff. And then we think we're right. Then we join echo chambers, right? And then when there are 1,000 other people who are saying the same thing that we're saying when none of us have ever left the room, then like we think we're more right because now we're getting congruence from the world. Because like everyone else believes what I believe, so there's like no point in exploration because it's all been figured out. The world is nihilistic. There's no point in doing anything. Just embrace hedonism. Disagree completely. If you want to understand how to find fulfillment, you have to first figure out what is the nature of fulfillment. And now we're going to talk a little bit about sort of the yogic path. Now, the yogic path is about awareness. And simply what we want to do is look at ourselves through a series of experiences. Okay? And just see like, okay, what is more fulfilling and what is less fulfilling? So for example, like eat while watching. And eat by yourself, like without doing any distracting, no technology. Just eat the food. Which one is more fulfilling? Which one is more dopaminergic? Which one do you gravitate towards? Why do you gravitate towards it? In which one does the food taste better? Right? Oh, no. So y'all are making a mistake once again. No. Everyone's giving answers. This is intellect. Jumping in with answers. Don't do it. You can't answer this right now. This is the point. Y'all need to understand this very, very carefully. Right? You notice how quickly your mind does this. Like, this is the key thing. Do y'all see this? Your mind is like, I already know the answer. So now what you've done is you remove the necessity of actually engaging in the exercise because you already have the answer. Oh, I know. Oh, I know. If you want to understand why you can't find fulfillment, it is these three words. Oh, I know. I already know. No need to explore. I've read about it. I've done it before. Do it with awareness. Sit down and actually do it. Okay? And here's what we're going to do. So it's all about awareness. So this is what I'd recommend if you want to understand the nature of fulfillment. So you need to ask yourself, like, do I feel fulfilled? But we're going to give you a couple of exercises. First, seek new things. Why is this? This is because you already have answers for the existing stuff that you can do. So you can revisit like eating, but I would seek something new. So I would like, if you haven't climbed a mountain before, or even, like I would go climb a mountain. Like if you've never been snorkeling before, go snorkel. Okay? Second thing is embrace difficulty. Now, this is the opposite of the hedonistic path. Remember, the reason we're doing this is not just to make our life hard. It's to try to understand the nature of fulfillment. And so if you do something easy versus hard, ask yourself which one is more fulfilling. Which one is more fulfilling? Going for a walk that is 50 steps or going for a walk that is 5,000 steps? Which one is more fulfilling? Try it. And this is the key thing. This is why we get stuck. Because when we operate from hedonism, we move away from difficulty. And then when we move away from hardship, we narrow the range of behaviors we can engage in. So up here is hike, cook, camp, games. And down here is YouTube, games, Twitch. We narrow the scope of our life. And do we feel there's 1,000 people, millions of people out there that just do this all day. Are they fulfilled? Are the people that do this, are they fulfilled? Once again, you're going to want to answer. Right? Which is okay. You have some experience, but just be careful. Do an honest investigation. And so I'm going to leave y'all with one last exercise. So this is, do these two things. So just find something new, right? And do it with awareness. This is key. So awareness is more than just like the experience of emotion. So if you go do something, you may be anxious and therefore you don't enjoy it. We're not talking about enjoyment. We're talking about fulfillment. Enjoyment and fulfillment are two different things. That's why we have two different words for them. And if you go down the hedonistic, nihilistic route, then you're going to shoot for enjoyment all the time and you'll find an absence of fulfillment. And I've seen this like many, many, many times. The classic story about this situation is actually the story of Gautam Buddha, who had all of the enjoyments of the world and he woke up unfulfilled. And I've seen this a lot with people who are, financially well off. And what they find is that like their life is not, they have luxury and they have security, which are absolutely important contributors to happiness. There's been research on this, right? Because it's hard to seek fulfillment when you are worried about putting food on the table and having a roof over your head. So you should absolutely do those things first, right? We're not saying that those aren't important, but it's just, it doesn't stop there. And this is where in the yogic tradition, there are 4 major goals of life. Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. Duty, wealth, pleasure, enlightenment. So this is the cool thing. I like this philosophy for this reason. They're not saying don't enjoy things. They're not saying don't get financial security. Right? What they're saying is that you should do your duty first, and then by all means you should enjoy some amount of wealth, right? So get your financial security, enjoy what life has to offer. Don't live like an ascetic. If you want to eat a slice of deep dish pizza, like eat a slice of deep dish pizza. And, for people who are curious, this is the Kam Sutra. This is even a religious text about like maximizing your pleasure, which is like a part of the path. And then at the end, pursue enlightenment. So like take what life has to offer, don't deprive yourself of it, but don't stop here. This is the problem with hedonism is like just this one, right? Then there are the tryhards who are just this one. But the truth is that and once again, this is from one particular tradition. You guys don't have to accept this. I personally like it. Because it sort of says like, yeah, you should be spiritual, you should do your duty, you should be a good person, but like you should enjoy life too. Like life is there to be enjoyed. And so if we're talking about finding fulfillment, look for it with awareness. And so I'm going to give you all just one last option to get you started, because awareness has to be cultivated. It's not just like experiencing an emotion, it's being fully aware of what you experience. So what I'm going to ask you all to do is go for a jog. Okay, so like health stuff aside. So if you have any contraindications to this medically and things like that, don't do this. But I'd say go for a jog for 15 minutes. Make sure you hydrate a little bit ahead of time. And then the first thing that you're going to want to do is drink water when you get back. Right? What I want you to do, grab a glass of water, go sit outside, and wait 5 to 10 minutes. And then see how fulfilling that glass of water is. Wait with it. Just watch yourself. Just watch yourself. Notice what happens. Like you're going to get these biological impulses. You're going to feel thirsty. You want the water. You want the water. You want the water. And just, obviously if you're like dehydrated or it's very hot outside, or don't do anything that's like dangerous. Like then drink the water. But just watch. The other thing that you can do is meditate in a hardcore way. What does this mean? So I'm going to teach you all the first step to hardcore meditation. Okay? So the first step to hardcore meditation is to sit somewhere and not meditate. So find a place to sit that's relatively comfortable and don't do anything. Don't engage in like thinking. Like don't like start thinking about something. Don't create stories in your head. Don't think about what you're going to be doing later. Don't let yourself do anything. If you want to try to meditate, you kind of can, but just sit somewhere for 10 minutes and watch what happens to you. Observe all of the impulses that happen, right? So there's a great exercise, which is stare at a wall. So some people have done this even up to an hour. And it's going to be so incredibly difficult because what's going to happen? What's going to happen is like your dopaminergic brain is going to be like, I need something. I need something. I need something. Gimme, 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 gimme. Gimme, 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 gimme. Bored, yes. Do you know what is the most frightening thing in the world to most people is boredom? What is there to be afraid of in boredom? It's 10 minutes. What are you going to do in that 10 minutes otherwise? Browse Reddit? Look at a meme? What do you have to lose? And see how quickly your mind rebels. This will teach you awareness. Once you have awareness, engage in activities. And ask yourself, what is the nature of fulfillment? Because how the hell are you going to find fulfillment if you don't understand what it is in the first place? And this is why everyone's stuck, because everyone's like, oh, like, how do I find fulfillment? Like, what's the point in anything? Like, why should I do anything? And it's like, you don't even understand what you're looking for. All you're doing is substituting whatever logic or intellect you have for any kind of understanding of experience. And then half the time, when your logical mind is telling you to do things, it's actually hijacked by a subconscious, like, dopamine addiction. So all it's trying to do is like, there's no point in anything. Guess I'm going to play more games today. Because that's life. Guess I'm going to play games. Oh, no. Right? Now I'm going to do it guilt-free because what's the point? What's the point of anything? Why bother, man? Look at this. Look at how scientifically valid this is. We're all just specks of dust on a rock whirling in space, which itself is a speck of dust in an unfathomably vast and complex universe. What does it matter if I start working on my term paper today? In the grand scheme of things, it's all irrelevant. So when it's irrelevant, what do you actually end up doing? Let me watch something on YouTube for a little bit. Just today. Because in the complete absence of meaning that your mind creates, your addictions run rampant. Right? It protects you. No guilt, bro. Forget about the guilt. Don't beat yourself up for procrastinating. It doesn't matter. You can keep doing it. It doesn't matter, man. 1,000 years from now, 10,000 years from now, what difference does it make whether you start your term paper today or tomorrow? How is it going to impact the grand scheme of humanity? So be careful about where your thoughts lead you. Be careful if you find yourself, it's a good question to ask, like, where does fulfillment come from? Why shouldn't I just be hedonistic? And this is where I'd say, like, sure, I could give you all sorts of answers, like, oh, like, you can have such a powerful impact on the world, man. Like, try to be a good human being. Forget about all that. Let's be a little bit yogic about it. Let's follow the path of the yogis. And ask yourself first, what is fulfillment? Define it. Like, what the hell is it? Then we can figure out how to, find it. We have to know what we're looking for first. And how do we do that? Be careful about your intellect, which is going to want to give you answers as substitutes for taking actions. Very tricky. So seek new experiences. Embrace adversity. So ideal that those experiences are not like super easy. And then do so with awareness. And if you start doing these things, you will understand the nature of fulfillment. I also had one other exercise which I'll leave you with, which is to find a moment of pure happiness and understand what are the components that are requisite for pure happiness. And the only way you can do that is to study happiness in all of its different shades. And the answer that I discovered was mind-blowing about the true nature of happiness. But you can't, I could tell it to you, but then you won't explore. Your mind will come up with answers. Right now it's saying, oh, it's this, it's this, it's this, it's this. But remember, it's like tasting a strawberry. Like, you can talk about it, you can learn about neuroscience, you can, watch other people eat it all you want to, but you're never going to taste it yourself until you actually take a bite of the strawberry. So try to find for yourself, this is hard. Find a moment of pure happiness and understand what are the prerequisites for it. Yeah, you want to know it now, right? So let's think about this. If you're saying, I want to know it now, What happens if you learn it now? What does your mind get to avoid if you understand the answer? If I tell you the answer, what do you get to do? Right? You don't have to bother, because the thing is, it's hard. So the harder it is, the more you want to get a helicopter ride to the top of the mountain. Like, you don't need a helicopter ride if you're climbing to the second floor of your house. You need a helicopter ride if you're going to the top of Everest, right? So be careful about what your mind wants. The harder it is, the more your mind is like, I don't want to. Why can't we just play games? Sit in front of a wall and stare at it? No, I don't want to. Just tell me what I'm going to learn anyway, so that I can be intellectually satisfied and I don't have to change anything about my life. Make sense? Right? So here's the thing. You guys want a little bit of advice. If you want life to be good, I don't know what other word to use. Generally speaking, hopefully it'll be easier. It doesn't mean that it's free of pain, right? Just understand yourself, man. Or woman. Or anything in between. Just understand yourself and how the hell you work. Just understand that, and life becomes so much more manageable. Not saying that it's all, because remember, if fulfillment and enjoyment are two different things, that means that you can live a fulfilling life that is absent of enjoyment. That's true too. That's what Viktor Frankl figured out. It's like, oh, being a Holocaust in a concentration camp sucks, and yet I can find fulfillment and meaning. So the two are actually somewhat independent, right? When you talk about the science of it, there's more relations there, right? So we know that security and a certain amount of financial stuff. We know that, for example, commutes over 45 minutes for married couples lead to sharp increases in divorce rates, right? So there are all kinds of interesting factors that we know from science, which you should absolutely take advantage of. But don't use logic and intellect as a substitute for experience. And be careful about how your mind tries to dodge all kinds of stuff that is good for you, because that's why you're stuck, right? Because you're listening to your mind. It's kind of a weird thing. Okay? So someone's asking, should we enjoy life with two sides of the coin? You figure it out. First, understand the nature of fulfillment. Don't ask me what you should do. Figure out for yourself what the nature of fulfillment is, and then the answer of what you should do and how you should live your life will become self-apparent. This is the last thing that I really like about the yogic path. The yogic path doesn't really say you should do anything. All it is a path of exploration, and then you yourself figure out, you'd make your determinations yourself. It's not teaching you that you should do this. And I mean, there's a lot of shortcuts there if you choose to have faith in them, but you don't need to listen to a single thing. It's tools of exploration, and you figure out the answers. Is fulfillment dharmic? That's something for you to answer. Right? You tell me. All right, we've got one more. It's a good one. Okay. The shortcuts are things like Raj Yoga. There's a lot of videos. If you guys check out Dr. K's Guide to Meditation, we talk a lot about that sort of stuff. What are the shortcuts? So it's yamas, niyamas, truthfulness, cleanliness, and you may be how does that help me find it? It's all in there. Raja, R-A-J-A, yoga, Y-O-G-A. Right? Okay. All right. I have tons of creativity, but no patience for creating. Recently, I feel like I had a lot of creativity exploding a bit. And sadly, I never learned any kind of medium to put this creativity into. Through my life, I tried several piano, guitar, drawing, painting, but none stick. Because in my case, I was losing patience. Either I was not good enough to do what I wanted to do, or I was getting to a point that I didn't want to pursue the endeavor of trying to get better, getting to a stage where you can't get better unless you just do or practice, thus getting frustrated and impatient. I tried and don't really know what to do. I feel like I need to become a designer, project manager, and give my creativity that way, but not really sure how to do that. Either it's tons of ideas of video or board game design, book or vlog or podcast. I tried several, but due to the lack of interest from others, the ability to advertise such creativity, or having any personal talent in any kind of artsy stuff, I feel like it prevents me to bloom. I feel like this impatience came from video game addiction, and that the constant gratification of having fun right now and working for any future thing is not really easy. I can on the spur of the moment be really creative for like 1 or 2 months, but then it goes dormant for a few weeks or months. So I guess I'm not sure what to do. So this, unfortunately, is an increasingly common thing that we're seeing. That we have people out there who are interested in doing creative work. They're interested in doing substantial work. They have a lot of like really powerful ideas. You know, they genuinely want to create like an explosion of creative energy. And they can even direct that energy for 1 or 2 months and make some very serious progress. But then inevitably what happens is that they lose patience. They start to get very, very, concerned about how things aren't really working. They start to feel like they're not really living up to their potential. And they feel like very, very frustrated with themselves, right? Because you know that it's in you, like you've got it somewhere in there, but you just can't let it out. Because even this phrase bloom, I think, is really important because it implies that the flower's right there, right? The bud is there. It's just not able to open. So how do you understand this? Like, what do you do if you're in this situation where you have these bursts of creativity, but then you either lose patience or you get frustrated, you're not really willing to practice, you get kind of impatient. Like, how do you manage this? This is a great question. And so how do you bloom when you're too impatient to, right? That's the question. How do you sort of understand this creative process? How do you get yourself to actually create? So let's start by kind of understanding a couple of basics. Okay, so what's going on here? So the first is how to bloom creatively. So let's take a look at what this person has, or let's look at the pattern. So let's try to lay out all the pieces of the puzzle. The first is that they have creative energy that comes in bursts. And then fizzles. Okay? They also, will act for a while. So they tend to have a problem of follow through. They experience impatience, frustration, and they're not really able to, how did they put it? They get to the stage where you can't get better unless you practice. Okay? So stop at the just practice phase. And then, last thing is that they're curious about whether this has to do with constant gratification from video games. So if you're creatively stifled, like, how can we piece all these elements together? What's going on here? And how can we start to move forward in kind of a positive way? So the first thing that I want to do is talk about proposed answers. So if you guys are looking at this, there may be some things that are jumping to your mind. So the first is, let's look at the situation. So I have 1 month of creativity. And then it fizzles. So answer number 1 is discipline. I need more discipline, right? Because this just practice is not something I'm willing to do. So answer number 1 is, this first solution we're going to look for is, how do I take 1 month of effort, develop discipline so it becomes 2 months, practice becomes 3 months, practice, right? This is the answer number 1, develop discipline. Related to this is we can say things like just practice. Sorry, bro, the only way that you're going to learn to be creative is just by doing this. Okay, decent answer. Okay, and now let's try to understand a little bit about, so maybe they say it's like, games have something to do with it. So let's think a little bit about games. So what happens in a game? So we have an action, we get a reward, action, reward. And so basically we get rewards every step of the way. So the real way that we're going to overcome this is by understanding what is happening in our mind. So literally what is happening in our mind. When we play video games, what are we actually training our brain to do? So I want y'all to understand this. The brain is kind of like an animal. And it does what it's trained to do. So for example, if I sit there and I learn the alphabet, I will train it time and time again. It won't be, learning the alphabet isn't fun. For those of you that, especially if you try to learn a new language, it's not fun, right? Your brain really, really dislikes it. It really wants to revert back to speaking the language that is easy for it. And that's because the brain is efficient. So the brain is designed to be efficient. And as it's efficient, it detests adversity. But you can train it. If you teach it the alphabet, it'll learn how to read, and then it'll be fine. So when we play a video game, what are we training our brain to do? So let's even talk about content algorithms, right? So let's say I'm on Reddit or YouTube. And when I get bored of something, what do? I click something else, right? When I play a video game, this game is let me play Dota for a little bit. Dota's getting boring. Let me switch to Elden Ring. So in games, what we're sort of doing is we have an impulse and we gratify the impulse. So what are we training our brain to do? So neurons that fire together wire together. Remember that when it comes to how the brain works, neurons will fire once and then they'll get a little bit stronger, and then it becomes easier to fire again and again and again and again, and that's how we form a habit. So at that point, things are automatic. So what have we trained our brains to do by playing tons of video games that have constant gratification? What we've trained them to do is respond to impulses. This is essentially what we've trained our brain to do. Is when you have an impulse, you don't have to restrain it, you don't have to control it, you can just gratify it. So our brain has been trained to gratify impulses. Now let's take a look at our person who has creative issues, right? So when the person has a burst of creative energy, what are they doing with their impulses? What do y'all think? What are they doing? Some people are saying nothing. I feel like writing a book. Absolutely. Acting on impulse. Let me start a vlog. Let me start a podcast. Cool. I've got this impulse and it's positive energy, right? It's creativity. I'm moving in the right direction. I'm creating something. It's an explosion. It feels so good. Let me work on it for a month. They're acting on impulse, but in a good way. And then what happens is they get impatient. They get frustrated on day 30. And then they stop. What are they doing? Are they acting on impulse? So their mind is telling them, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to play a video game. They have that impulse, acting on impulse. So this is the key thing that y'all need to understand. This is why people get stuck, okay? Y'all need to understand this very clearly. Explosion of creativity plus discipline equals success. This is the formula that everyone who is in this problem looks for. They say, how can I start here and sustain with discipline and then do this for 1 year? How do I sustain this? That's the question. It's the wrong question. That's why everyone's stuck. Because this is half the problem. This is the same thing. Starting on an impulse or quitting on an impulse is still acting in relation to an impulse. So this is the problem, because here's the thing. The brighter the candle, the faster it burns out, right? The more excited, I've seen this a lot, like in relationships too, where people who like fall head over heels over, like they're like, oh my God, like this is the best relationship in the universe. And then like 3 months later, it's like an absolute train wreck. Not always. Oftentimes. Super, super excited about this kind of thing. Oh my God, let's do this. Let's do this. Let's do this. And then like, where is it 3 months from now? I'm going to sign up for guitar lessons. I'm going to go get this guitar. I'm going to get these really cool picks. This pick was signed by my favorite artist. Oh my God, it's going to be great. It's going to be like, I'm going to play every day. We're enjoying it. Yeah. Ow, my hands hurt. My fingers. I need calluses. Calluses are taking too long to form. It hurts too much to play. Let me put it down. So as long as you're acting on impulse, like this is the problem, is everyone thinks that explosion of creativity is a good thing, and then impatience is the problem. So they want to get rid of this and they want to keep this. Doesn't work like that. They're both the problem. This is the problem. The whole reason is because the way you're starting the task is in the wrong way. So you're doomed to failure. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't use your explosions of creativity. We'll get to that in a second. But this is sort of like, like if you want light throughout the night, you don't want to light a firecracker, right? You want a candle. So interestingly enough, if you want to learn how to be better at this, you need to train your impulsivity. Okay, so this is like frontal lobe function. And remember, like people are smart, right? Like people like know things about themselves. So even as we look at this statement, I feel like impatience came from video game addiction and constant gratification. I would trust that instinct. Do y'all see this statement here is a statement of understanding. This is a statement of their own experience. It's not theoretical. This is what they've learned. I can, on the spur of the moment, be really creative for 1 or 2 months and then it goes dormant for a couple of weeks. These are both part of the problem. It's all the same problem. The problem is that we think half of it is the solution, whereas that's part of the problem too. So what do we do about this? Train your impulsivity. Okay? Because if you start in an impulsive way, you're giving into your impulsivity. It's going to be hard to stop giving into the impulsivity. Okay? So, what should you do about this? There are lots of different meditations for training your impulsivity. Essentially, any meditation technique will work for this. So this is where I kind of want to say just meditate. But it's not enough to say just meditate. What I want you to really do when you meditate is recognize that the reason you are doing this is to level up your impulsivity. You're trying to train the animal that is your mind. So this is where I think practices like Tarataka are really good. So you're going to stare at, you're going to do fixed point gazing. So you can do like candle gazing or something like that. And then your mind is going to wander all over the place. And then you're going to kind of focus on this thing. You're going to train your attention to be on one thing. The other thing that you can do is as you do a focusing practice, what I want you to do is wait for the wandering mind. Your mind is going to wander. If you say, okay, we're going to concentrate on the smell of this incense. Smell the incense. Another really good one here is watch the smoke. So watch the smoke that rises from incense. Like it's going to be a beautiful plume. Just watch it. And then your mind is going to wander and you're going to be waiting for it. As it wanders, you're going to bring it back. So here's the smoke coming up from the incense. And your mind is going to go here, it's going to go here, and then you're going to bring it back. And every time you do this, this is one push-up for your mind. It's one push-up for your impulsivity. Impulsive action, return. Impulsive action, return. Okay? So this is like the first thing. You can train your mind. Second thing, slow down your start. Because remember, giving in to the explosion of energy is still giving in to the impulse. So slow down your start. You feel like doing this task for 1,000 hours a day? Don't do it for 1,000 hours a day. Set aside a particular time of your day, so make a schedule. And don't give in to the impulses. Oh, I'm going to read about vlogs. I'm going to research this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to download some software. I'm going to order a microphone. I'm going to do this. Don't do all of that. Set aside a time, 1 to 2 hours, max per day. Recognize that you have a limited amount of fuel. And basically what you need to do is you need to, how can I say this? Space out your creative energy to last into habit formation. This is the problem. So when you engage, when you have a burst of creative energy and you're like, today I'm doing this, I'm going to start at 8 a.m., I'm going to end at 5 p.m. Tomorrow, I'm going to stay up kind of late playing video games, and then I'm going to start tomorrow at noon, and I'm going to go to midnight, right? I'm going to just follow my impulses. I'm going to research microphones. I'm going to look at what these streamers are doing. I'm going to look at software. Today, I'm going to look at software from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. You don't build any habits, because as long as you're building into that, giving into the creative energy, it's and then, on day 4, I don't feel like doing it. I've done a lot of work, right? Because I did a lot of work. I did 20 hours of work on this project, which is enough. So let me take a break. And then the weekend rolls around and then you're doing this again. So this is where what you want to do is marshal that energy, right? It's kind of like if I'm going to go from point A to point B with a candle, and I need to light a fire at point B, I need to make sure that candle stays lit. I don't want a firework. I need to have that creative energy last until I can start recruiting other parts of my brain, like habit formation, building a schedule. And what that also means is that your actions, so when you do this, your actions are going to get decoupled from reward. This is huge. Right? So how does this person know when to stop at midnight? It's kind of the impulse is gone, or they've achieved some kind of reward, or they got lots of rewards. That's what's sustaining their energy. So the reason I can do it for 1 month is because just like RPGs or MMOs, level 1 to 10, you can get in 5 hours. But level 50 to 60 takes 5 months. Same is true for real life, right? RPGs have captured that mechanic really, really well. Right? So what you need to do is decouple your actions from the reward. And the way that you do that is by spreading out your creative energy and making a schedule. So this is what I'm going to do for today. And now suddenly what you're doing is training your brain to be somewhat different, which is that the actions are not going to be reward-based and they're not going to be impulse-based. It's going to be in the opposite direction from what video games train you to do. And once you start using these things like schedules, once you start using meditations, you'll start to move in the right way. But oftentimes I find that the trickiest thing is that when people have these bursts of creative energy, what they look for is discipline, right? You have the bursts of energy. And they don't see this as the problem. They see it as like, the good thing. And then what they're missing is discipline. So all they're focused on is how do I make discipline? How do I make discipline? Which is totally fine. I mean, it's good to build discipline. But you have to understand that this whole phenomenon is actually the problem. That giving it into the impulses of your mind, which is how it's trained by video games, which is absolutely correct, is the problem. And what you want to do is don't give in to those impulses. Space things out. Harness that creative energy to build a habit. As you start to rein in that creative energy, what you will naturally do is decouple actions from reward. Instead, what you'll start to do is instead of getting some kind of dopaminergic, oh my God, this is so cool. This software is awesome. Instead, what we're going to get is I did what I was supposed to today. Good job. Right? This is what I want at the end of the day. I want 3 checkboxes that you make the day before that get checked the day after. This is what you need to do. It's not just I don't know what I'm going to do. No checkboxes. I'm going to just wander over here, and then I'm going to wander over here, and then let me configure this, and let me order that. There's no organization to it. It's all impulsive flow. And as long as you are giving into that impulsive flow, it's going to be very difficult to accomplish anything creatively. Questions? I'm an artist at my full-time job, and this session is so helpful. Fantastic. That's what we're here for. So someone's saying, so basically meditation and a to-do list? No. It's a very good question. So this is the problem. When we look at the actual solution, it seems simple, right? So basically a meditation and a to-do list. The difference, so let me put it this way. Let's say you have 2 people, one person who works out regularly, or let's say one person who eats healthy and one person who doesn't eat healthy. And so you look at them and you kind of look at their behaviors and you say so basically just order salad every day, right? Sure, that's what it looks like on the outside. What's the difference between the person who eats healthy and the person who doesn't eat healthy? Their actions are different, sure, but the internal mindset is actually very different. This is very important to understand. So for the person who eats healthy, people assume, if I eat unhealthy, people think, okay, I'm undisciplined, and it requires a lot of willpower to overcome my internal impulses so that I can order a salad instead of a burrito. And so people look at the action, they're like, okay, I just need to eat salad every day, right? Whereas if you talk to the person who eats healthy, how much willpower do they use on a daily basis? Very little. Very little. So when you're asking, is it basically a to-do list and meditate? That's what it looks like on the outside. But if you actually want to succeed, it's not about what you do on the outside. It's about the internal work. It's about the barrier of entry to doing the right thing. That's what we need to change. And that starts with understanding, right? When I talk to people who go to the gym 5 days a week and I ask them, how hard is it for you to go to the gym? They say it's very easy. So that very easy versus very hard is an internal change. It's a mindset shift. It's some amount of a habit. That's what you need to change. It's not the actions. Anyone can tell you to I could have just, look at this for a second. This is not what I did today. I didn't say, how to bloom creatively. Make a to-do list. Meditate. That's it. The rest of this doesn't matter. This is all useless. Useless. I didn't give you a 30-second answer. Right? Because what needs to change for people, and you see this with alcohol addiction as well, where it's I woke up one day and I just realized that enough is enough. How do you become sober? Just stop drinking. That doesn't actually help. right? Sure, it's correct. But like the struggles that we have are not in the action themselves. We all know what to do. The struggles we have is the mindset in the internal work. So that needs to change. And how does that need to change? It starts by diagnosing the problem properly, which is that giving into your creative impulses is dooming you to fail. That at the end of the day, giving into your creative impulses and giving into your impatient impulses is still giving into your impulses. If you're misdiagnosing the problem, you're going to stay stuck. So marshal that creative energy. That's the first thing you should do, is restraint. Restraint from joy. Restraint from burning yourself out through a month of intensive creative activity. Marshal that creative energy. Drip it throughout 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. Then you'll start to recruit habits. Then it'll start to be easier for you. That's what needs to change, is the internal stuff. Right? We have 1,000 tutorials on YouTube telling you can read 1,000 books about how to write a best-selling novel. You can take as many classes as you want to. You can take Brandon Sanderson's writing class on YouTube, which is fantastic. You can listen to podcasts. There's like the answers are out there. How do I write a best-selling novel? You just sit down and you write. That's the problem, is the mind seeks a solution. It doesn't want to do the internal work. So it's about internal resistance, understanding why you do what you do, understanding your impulses. Because once you understand like what's under the hood, then you can start to make adjustments. And as you tweak a little bit here and tweak a little bit there, then the results that you get will be quite different. So it's so much more than a to-do list in meditation, although that is correct. That is the essence of it, right? It's what's on the inside. What makes it hard to follow a to-do list? What makes it hard to meditate? That's what you need to understand. That's the individual resistance. A wonderful question, though. Someone's asking, how do you make it into a habit? By slowing it down from the get-go. That's how you make it a habit, right? So slow it down. So if you want to like start doing push-ups every day, like don't start with 10, start with 1, right before you go to bed. Last thing you do, I'm going to squeeze in 1 push-up before I go to sleep. That's how you build a habit. Okay? All right. So, oh my God, this is such a good question. Doctor, can you be truly creative if you turn it into a habit? That is when you are the most creative. So here's the other thing to understand about creativity. When did creativity stop being in our control? When did we start treating creativity as different from anything else that we do? Oh yeah, in other dimensions of my life, I can have a routine and I can have a habit. But when it comes to creativity, just going to send it out the window. Incorrect. So the people who are successful artists are the ones who make a habit of creating. It's a skill to access that creative part of yourself, right? So this is where, like, if you look at, what's his name? Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, right? The guy who developed flow. He's like talking about developing a process to access that creativity. The states of meditation are very similar as well. Well, it's like you can't, let me put it to you this way. Like, so you can't create a state of sleep, right? You can't just be like, I'm asleep. No. Can habit help with sleep? Absolutely. Even though you can't create it. In fact, it facilitates it. So when you develop a good creative habit, when you develop a good process, it primes your brain to like be in the right mode. And then once you're in the right mode, like the creativity actually flows more easily. The problem is that the reason you think creativity only flows at random times is because the way that you've allowed it to flow is only at random times, right? There's a difference between like relying on rain for water and building a well. Like if you just wait for it to rain, then of course you're going to think the only time I can get water is when it rains. What I'm telling you to do is build a well. And then suddenly that truth, which is just as true, the only time the rain comes is like when it rains, right? That's the only time to get water. But if you build a well, it completely transforms your ability to do things. So habit and creativity can go hand in hand. Absolutely. The problem, and it's not even an incorrect conclusion because you just haven't built a well yet, right? So you just assume, based on your prior experience, that the only time I've been creative is when it rains. That's the only way to get water because that's my experience. So question it, explore it, look at that resistance, try building a habit and see what happens to your creativity. Excellent questions. So someone's asking, I like art and want to make a career out of it. Is it wrong to make that a goal and outcome focus? Yes and no. So this is where, generally speaking, we want action focuses instead of outcome foci. But remember that all of these things they're not like objectively good or objectively bad. What they are, I want y'all to understand what the options are and choose the appropriate tool. So of course, like in some ways you want to be outcome oriented, right? Like if I get a job, for example, I need to be like outcome oriented with respect to salary so that I can pay my dues. Like I can pay for myself, I can go on vacation, I can, support my family, whatever. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is that we become overly outcome focused. And the main thing is that we become unintentionally outcome focused. We've started to be controlled by outcomes. And this is where if you want to be an artist, what I would recommend to you is that you don't try to become a best-selling author, right? Or artist. What you try to do is make the best book. And that's a subtle but very important difference, right? So write the best goddamn book you can. Don't worry about becoming a best-selling author. Paradoxically, it's the people who worry about becoming best-selling authors that have the hardest time becoming best-selling authors. And it's the people who don't try to become best-selling authors and focus on writing the best goddamn book that they can that wind up as best-selling authors. Now, you may have to make some adjustments and stuff based on like markets and stuff like that. So I'm not saying you're ignoring all that stuff. But generally speaking, with artistic pursuits, like the best games are going to come not out of like formulaic understanding of things, but someone who's like, I want to play a game where I can do this. So like even Elden Ring is like, I hope a great example where From Software was like, we want to make a Dark Souls game, but we want it to be open world. And that's our goal. It's not, we want to make the best selling game on Steam. That's not their goal. Maybe it is. I don't know. I mean, I can't speak for them. But in terms of people who do creative work, it's like, devote yourself to like the purity of your action, man. That is what makes human creativity so amazing. Right? I don't know that like when Michelangelo made the sculpture of David, he was like, I want a piece of artwork that will be appreciated for thousands of years. I don't know that that was his goal. What I imagine his goal is like, I want to make just a magnificent piece of artwork. So devote yourself to the action. And it's fine to be an artist. Just make the best art you can possibly make. And then do the business stuff, right? Like it's important to do that stuff. But don't let that be your focus. I mean, you can. It's just not what I would personally advocate for. Oh, church told him to? Should we never be impulsive? No. You can be impulsive. So this is where I don't know why everyone asks, if you'll notice that everyone always asks these binary questions and black and white questions. Should I never be impulsive? Should I never do this? Is ego always bad? No. So most of life is like moderation. Just understand it's like, should I never use peppers in my food? No, like you can use peppers. Just be aware of what the effect is. Right? It's fun to be impulsive. Be impulsive with awareness. Give in to your impulses. That also is incredibly fulfilling. If you just give in to your impulses, but you do so with awareness. You don't do it on autopilot. That's actually like not as fun. When you're like, you know what? Today's like one of these days where there were some days when I was growing up and I was going to school and I never wanted to go to school, but I had to go to school. And as an adult, paradoxically, I want to go to bed on time. Because like tomorrow's a work day where it's like, I'm just going to take tomorrow off. I'm going to stay up late. It's 7 p.m. I'm going to drink a cup of coffee and I'm going to like play a game until 4 in the morning. I'm going to do it today intentionally and enjoy every second of it. I think that's totally fine. By all means, be impulsive. but do so with awareness. Don't be autopilot impulsive. That's where your life gets in trouble. So the key to happiness is awareness. You tell me, Zagregor. You tell me. You explore it. And you tell me whether awareness is the key to happiness. Okay. Who are we rating? On a chess? Okay, we can rate chess. Any, for those of you that are saying, don't leave me. Destiny or chess? What do y'all think? Okay. So who is it? Anna Chess? All right, let me just make sure I have this right. Chattars. My friends. Is it Anna_chess? Yes. All right. Let's send Anna Chess. So hope you all enjoyed today. We'll see y'all on Wednesday, okay? Take care.